Hello, this is Chat UTD and my reaction to another defeat, this time to Tottenham Hotspur. I seem to start most of my reaction videos with that same thing. It's a reaction to another defeat this time too, and then you fill in the blank of whoever the name of the team is. I must say today, I don't think it was a terrible performance by United. I think we played pretty well. We created some really clear-cut chances. It was a game of ebb and flow. I thought there was periods where they were really on top, then there was periods where we were. It was quite a good game to watch, and maybe because it was Tottenham and they're always going to give you a chance, maybe that's why we played half decent. Ultimately, we still lost the game, but I certainly wouldn't put it into the category of some of the performances we've seen this season, which have just been absolutely turgid. It wasn't like that today. I thought we played some good football. The bright sparks for me, I thought Joshua Zirkzee was very good. His great feet, some lovely little movements, carried the ball forward at pace, used his physicality a little bit more, looked a lot more confident than he has been before, held himself differently. So happy for Xerxes. I thought he played very well today. Dorgu looks very steady so far, like what I see of him. Up and down that left-hand side, athletic, strong, decent in the tackle. At times probably needs to do recovery tackles because his initial positioning isn't great, but he's young, he's raw. Going forward, makes a lot of good runs. He made a lot of good runs today that weren't picked out. His crossing's good. He's quite direct. So yeah, that's promising. Dallo on the right had a decent game. We looked so much more balanced with Dallo on the right and Dorgu on the left. We had 8 youngsters on the bench, which I've been crying out for. I think the reason is we've got so many injuries, which I'm going to come back to. But yeah, eight young kids on the bench, and all 5 of the kids that I mentioned in that video a couple of weeks ago around building around youth were either on the bench or, in Dorgu's case, starting today. So that is it. Okay. Only Obi Martin came on very late in the day. Could he have come on a bit earlier? Maybe, but it's still encouraging to have those players on the bench. And I understand why they didn't, because actually we were playing quite well and it looked like we could get back in the game with the team as it was. You probably didn't want to upset that, in particular when you're bringing on a youngster who's very untried. Rasmus was a bit brighter. So I think they're the main plus points from the game. We had a lot of players injured today, and it does make you wonder what's happened in training. They've had 9 days of 9 days since the last game, so they've only been training, and you wonder what's been happening, because all of a sudden we've got Ahmad's out for the season, Mainu's out for a few weeks, Ugarte and Collier are both missing. Ericsson wasn't in the squad. Who else? Anyway, there's obviously quite a lot of injuries because we've got 8 youngsters on the bench. The only senior player on the bench was Victor Lindelof. So it does make you wonder what's been going on there. Today he gave us an unwanted long-term record that we've had. Sorry, we've now got an unwanted. What's the word? I've fucked that up royally. Basically, it's 35 years since Spurs lasted the league double over us, so it's another unwanted ending of a record that we've got against the team. Didn't put that very well at all, but we've had a lot of them over the last few years. And there's another one. The midfield today, you looked at it and thought, oh God, like Casemiro and Bruno. And again, I reiterate, probably because it's Spurs, we got away with it, but it didn't look right. And you think, well, what choice did he have? Who's he going to play? It's not just who played in there. I can understand that, but whether they were given instructions to be stood so far apart from each other, and just whether they were given instructions to for it to be as arum scarum as it was. I don't know, maybe it was, but it's a tough one when you've got that many injuries. Garnacho was poor, I thought, today. He had a chance on 22 minutes, which is, it's a horrific miss. You know, a Premier League football player in the position he was in, you just pass it into the bottom corner. He did everything wrong. It was an absolute sitter, and he's blasted it over the bar. And I thought he's held onto the ball too long. Dorgu made so many good runs for him today that he just ignored. Turned into trouble. Was a bit selfish. Just not his best day today, to be honest with you. So while it was a decent game, we are 15th in the Premier League at the end of that game. We're 12 points clear of the relegation zone. It probably sounds worse than it is, but nonetheless, with 12 games remaining in the business end of the season, Manchester United are 15th in the Premier League. It's horrific. It really is. Cheers, by the way. I'm going to talk about something that I mentioned in my last video. I mentioned that the squad is full of substandard players, and at the time in that video, I didn't want to talk too much about it in any detail because it would detract, I think, a little bit from the point of the video, and it would have made the video too long. And I'm going to try and make videos a bit shorter, but perhaps do more of them. And I think this seems a good opportune moment to link it to link it on to the post-match analysis of the game we've just had, and put a little bit more meat on the bones of it. So I made that comment. I think the squad has become substandard, and it's been over a period of time. The standard of play we've been getting has got a little bit less, and that becomes normal, and then it's a little bit less again, and that becomes normal, and then it's a little bit less again, and you've got what we've got now. I'm not saying I don't like quite a lot of the players, I quite like them, but I'm just talking about, if we're being cutthroat and ruthless, are they good enough to lead Manchester United to, let's say, even the top 4 or 5 in the Premier League? And I looked at the squad in more detail, and I believe I've broken it into categories. I believe we've got a collection of players that fall into the following 4 categories. Some of them would be in more than one of these categories. So category 1, top European clubs cast-offs. Category 2, players with potential but are probably quite raw and still need to develop their game. Number 3, injury-prone players. And number 4, players that have had their chance at United and really need to be moved on. Most of our players fall in to one or more of those categories. The only ones that don't for me are Ahmad, who, as I say, is out for the season, massive blow. I believe Bruno. I know people will disagree with that, and weirdly probably Onana, because he's none of those 4 categories. He's just not good enough. So let's just look at De Ligt, Ugarte and Mazraoui, 3 of our signings from the summer. I like all 3 of those players, but let's have it right. Bayern Munich didn't want De Ligt or Mazraoui. So we've got a European elite club's cast-offs. They fall into that category. Ugarte falls into that category. PSG didn't want him. Do those 3 players improve our team? Absolutely they do. Absolutely they do. But would they get into Arsenal's team, Liverpool's, City's? No, I don't think they would. And I look back to the Ferguson era, and a feature of that was that we had unsung heroes in our team, players like Ji-sung Park, John O'Shea, Darren Fletcher, Wes Brown. Dating back even further, you'd have Brian McClare. Players that were not superstars, but would always be available for you. They'd come in, they'd do a job. They'd never complain about not playing. They would have a phenomenal attitude, and without them, the squad probably dynamics wouldn't be the same. They're the glue really that holds things together. Whilst you've then got those other superstars that go and steal the headlines. Now, if any of those players played for Man United now, they'd be our best players. And that's the thing with De Ligt, Mazraoui and Ugarte. Those 3 should be those unsung heroes, the glue. They're not. They're our best players. Or they're certainly 3 of our best players. And I'm not saying I don't like them. I'm not saying they're not good players. Absolutely they are. But are they of the standard to take United into that top 4 or 5? Certainly when you look around what's around them, then probably not. I'd go one step further. If you look at the rest of the squad, it's not just Arsenal, Liverpool and City that they wouldn't get into. There's a number of our players that I think would struggle to get in: Brighton, Aston Villa, Nottingham Forest, Newcastle, Bournemouth teams. And maybe teams lower than that. So, of course, then that's a problem. Excuse me. I do sometimes go back in time and sort of talk about old United teams, and I do it mainly to kind of give a reference point, and I'm going to do that now. The 93-94 team for me is the best Manchester United team that I've watched. Certainly enjoyment-wise, I loved watching them play. But if you look at that team, none of those players fall into any of those four categories I mentioned before. None of them were cast-offs. None of them were injury-prone. None of them were players that had their chances should be moved on. We had two, I'd say, in that 93-94 team who, when they came through, were probably potential and very raw. And that was Ryan Giggs, but obviously it was very obvious from an early stage that he was a surefire thing. And Kanchelskis, who came in from the Ukraine, who was not really known at all. But if you go through the rest of the team, Schmeichel was a well-scouted signing, fantastic signing. Most of Europe's top clubs probably wanted him. Then the rest, they all have a lot in common. So the rest of them, let's go from left to right. Dennis Irwin was Oldham's best player. We bought him. Steve Bruce was Norwich's best player. Gary Pallister was Middlesbrough's best player. Paul Parker was QPR's best player. Paul Ince was West Ham's best player. Roy Keane was Nottingham Forest's best player. Mark Hughes had been at the club, went to Barcelona. Maybe. Excuse me, perhaps you could say a cast-off from Barcelona, but I don't. Hughes has massively proved himself over the period of time that he came back to United. And then you got Cantona, who's Cantona. So the only two, as I say, are Kanchelskis and Giggs, who were potential and raw when they were signed. Now, quite a number of those players were signed well before the maturation of that team, but they were the best players for the club that they played for, and Man United bought them. If you look at if that's possible to do that now, the calibre of club that you're going to be buying from is not going to be very good, because we can't just go and poach Brighton's best player or Newcastle's best player or Villa's best player or maybe even Bournemouth's best player anymore, because those teams and those clubs are better than us. We still have a pull, but I'm not sure we can just rock up and go, we're Man United, plus we haven't got any money. So the clubs that let's just see, the clubs we could maybe go to and poach their best players from are the following clubs. Wolves, I put West Ham, but I mean, maybe not, but okay, Wolves, West Ham, Everton, Palace, Brentford, Fulham, possibly Forest, even though Forest are having a fantastic season. But if we went to Wolves, for example, for Kuna, who's their best player, one, we ain't got any money to get him. Two, he's probably thinking, no, I want to play for a better team. Maybe Arsenal, Liverpool, Chelsea, City, maybe they're not going to come knocking for him, but Newcastle or Villa or Brighton might. And they're better clubs, and you'd have less pressure on you playing there. You'd probably be free to go and continue your career in an upward trajectory. You come to United, and we've seen it just eats people alive, that environment. And you'd probably look at it and think, yeah, it's a big club, but we can't give silly wages out now. So we can't do it that way. Not that I'd want us to. And I think you've got that dual problem. We haven't got the money to do it, and we haven't got the pull we used to have before. So those players are more likely, in some respects, to go to Brighton, Newcastle, Villa, Bournemouth, etc. So the landscape's changed. We can't just go and poach the best players even from clubs that you would say are, lower end Premier League clubs. It's not as straightforward as that anymore. So how do you build a team moving forward? It has to be through youth, like I said before. And I mentioned in my last video, by the way, I mentioned Liam Delap and called him Rory Delap, and then laughed at myself and said how it's ridiculous, I've got his name wrong. I wasn't that wrong, because his name is Liam Rory Delap and his dad is Rory Delap, which I never knew that. I never put that together. I just thought he had the same second name, but Liam Delap is Rory Delap's son, who plays for Ipswich. So we're being linked to him, and you could say, well, that is an instance of United going and getting a lower club's best player, but Ipswich are going to get relegated. And I don't know, without looking at the stats, he's not going to score you 20 goals a season, I don't think. So you're adding more substandard players onto an already substandard squad. How do you move forward with that in an era of austerity, which is what we're in? It's really difficult, isn't it? So I just thought I wanted to put a bit of meat on the bones of that from what I spoke about the other day. bringing it back to the now, Amrim's got what he's got, and he's got to find a way of finding some kind of catalyst or antagonist to get the best out of these players, to impose his style upon them, to galvanise them. And I know that they're not brilliant, and I've just gone through, I've kind of gone through that with talking about why I think they're substandard or given those categories. So I'm not going to contradict myself, but whilst they're not great, I think they're better than 15th. And we saw it against City and Liverpool and Arsenal. The antagonist, the catalyst there was that we're playing against a big team, and it floats the boat to the players. So all of a sudden, things like making a 5-yard pass, which we seem to find very difficult in games against Fulham and Crystal Palace and Brentford and Brighton, we can do that against Arsenal and City and Chelsea and Liverpool. We can do an organised press. We can look like we've got some kind of fluidity in game plan. We can do all the basics right in those games because there's that catalyst and that antagonist. Amrim has to find that. And what I'm looking for is, it always seems to need to be an external catalyst, an external trigger, if you like. He's got to find something in them and bring it out of them, if that's possible. Now, you would say, surely the antagonist, the catalyst needs to be, you play for Man United. But we know that the culture at our club isn't like that anymore. So unfortunately, that's not the case. But those two cup competitions are so important. And with Ahmad out for the season, with Martinez out for the season, with all these other injuries, it doesn't look good. But he can't give up. He's got to try and find something in these players and try and get the best out of them in the remaining games. I have a horrible, horrible feeling with Amorim that Ineos are going to do something stupid. That they'll look at it at the end of the season and said, this hasn't gone the way we wanted it, and bin him off or something. I don't know. He looks broken. And I think it's because he's the right person in a way. I think it's because he knows that the standards aren't high enough and he's demanding more, but you're not getting it. I like that he gets frustrated. I like that he's pissed off. I want to see that from a manager when we're 15th in the league. He's not just talking nonsense in press conferences. But the situation is what it is. The club's absolutely skint. And I don't know how you move it forward. Just to finish off today, I mentioned in my last video about potentially taking my my lads, my 10-year-old and my 8-year-old to FC United. And in the last couple of days, I've looked into it a lot more. I've looked into kind of like where are the most vocal areas, the best place to stand, train links, car park, where's a decent bar nearby, all that kind of stuff. And just out of interest, and I'm not getting ahead of myself, I'm not saying for a second I'm going to get a season ticket for FC United. I just thought, I'm just out of interest, I'm just going to see what it would cost and then compare it to United, not for a season ticket, but for a one-off game. So I said my lad's 10, he's not, he's 10 in April, so he's 9, so he's nearly 10. So for me, and a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old, to have a season ticket at FC United, if the price was to stay the same next season, would be £217 all in. For the three of us to go to every single game, every single home game. To go to one Manchester United game next season at home, for me and a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old, would be £198. So it's £19 cheaper to go to one Manchester United game for 3 people versus a whole season of games at FC United. Now, of course, FC United, the standard isn't going to be very high. I know that the policing won't cost as much, the stewarding, all the things that you have to do at United, I'm sure, which is an astronomical cost. I know all that, and I know you're watching, I was going to say much better football, you're watching better football, and the players are paid a lot more money and etc. But that price discrepancy is outrageous. One game at United would only be £19 cheaper than a season ticket at FC United. Now, when I went to FC United when it first started at Gig Lane, it was like being there was about 1,000 people piled behind the goal. It was like being at a United away game. It was just constant chanting Man United chants. Now it's 20 years on, so they've probably got FC United chants, but I believe they do still sing United songs. I'm not interested in FC United chants. Maybe as time went by, if I started to have an affiliation with them, I would be. But I want to go for 90 minutes, get behind a goal with probably roughly about 700, 1,000 people, whatever. I think the majority of fans are behind the goal. They don't fill the stadium, I don't think, but my understanding is the majority are behind the goal, and just chant Man United songs for 90 minutes. The football's not going to be great, but I can think of worse ways to spend my Saturday afternoons. So we'll see. As I said, I'm going to go and do a recce at some point, and I'll keep you informed as to how that goes. Just to summarise again today, I thought we played pretty well today. No ranting and raving from me, but it's another defeat. We're 15th in the league. We've got Everton next week, and Everton have gone above us this weekend, as have Spurs. If Everton beat us next weekend, they would go, I think, 4 points clear of us, and then it becomes very difficult for us to get out of 15th place. We could be, 15th or 14th place. We're going to be marooned in that sort of position. And whilst we're not going down, it's embarrassingly low for Manchester United, and an indictment of where we are as a club. It's weird times. Look, what can I say that's not been said? Thanks for tuning in if you did. Glazers out.